Hey everyone, it's Terry Miller with the Des Moines, Iowa user group. I am so far behind on getting videos uploaded, and I'm going to attempt to get the last 6 months worth all done here in the next couple of days. So the first video here that is to follow now is one that where Christensen, our Salesforce user group co-lead, has talked about some flow best practices that she likes to use. So take a look. Hope you enjoyed this video and those that hopefully quickly follow for all of our user groups. Thanks. Hey everyone, it's Terry with Terry's Tidbits. I am so glad you're here. So welcome to the Des Moines, Iowa user group meeting. We've got a good group here today, and our topic is going to be on flow and some just good practices related to how to lay out your flows. We have a wonderful speaker here today. Those of you who may know her, Carissa Christensen, also known as our co-lead for our user group. She's fantastic. She's been doing flow for quite a long time, and we were talking prior to the session, prior to you all coming online. We're anticipating some interesting conversations today. Everybody kind of has their preferred way of doing flows, and so fall in line where you feel like it makes sense to. Let's make it conversational. Let's talk through some advantages, disadvantages of different approaches, perhaps, as we go through this, and let's just have some fun here today. And with that, Clarissa, I'm going to shut up and let you take over from here.
Okay. Yeah. Like Terry said, I know that you're not all going to agree with me, and that's totally okay. This is what's worked best for me over the course of my career. So we're just going to roll with it. I do have a few slides to go through first. Get those queued up here. Share screen. Okay, hopefully everyone is seeing my chalkboardy looking screen. Excellent. Okay, just click to advance now. Okay. It's my first time using this presentation tool. In case you wanted to know about me and why I'm qualified to talk to you about flows, I love them and spend most of my time developing them. My team will tell you I'm a Salesforce developer, but what that really means is I spend almost all of my time playing in flow. And if other things are important to you, I've been a Salesforce admin since 2013. Pretty sure I started building flows in 2016 in the old school Cloud Flow Designer. Throwback to that if anyone remembers it. And I think I have 6 certifications. I don't know. I have some. They're great. Okay, so today we're going to talk about 3 different things that I think are important when we're talking about the different ways we can discuss flow design. So when we talk about Autolaunch Flows, and this is the slide that I want you to take away. If you take away nothing else from this presentation, these are Carissa's strongest thoughts boiled down to like a sentence or 2 per type of flow, okay? So an Autolaunch flow is your best friend. I feel like you should have this kind of flow more than any other kind in your org because you can puzzle piece them into your other flows. And my guiding principle for this one is to optimize them to do minimal DML operations. I tell this to people that I'm teaching flow to. You want to keep your pink at the beginning and the end most of the time. Sometimes it makes sense to have it in the middle because you don't need that information until you need it. And so then we're going to go get it. But for the most part, I try to keep my pink at the top and the bottom of the flow and call it good. Record triggered flows, super powerful. It's an Apex trigger. You don't have to be an actual Salesforce developer to use. They're amazing. Terry and I were actually talking about this before everyone joined, that we have different philosophies on this one. I tend to lean towards having fewer of these because when I have more of them, I find myself encountering a lot of tech debt and a lot of this one failed because that one failed and it becomes a mess. So I try to minimize these in my org. But if you have a brand new org, it may make more sense for you to have multiples of these that you're just filtering very uniquely for entry criteria. So that's why I use the word strategic. We use these strategically because we don't want them to just make more technical debt than we want them to. And for screen flows, I love screen flows. In fact, I looked through all the flows in my org, and most of them are screen flows. So we really love screen flows here at ESO. And the biggest thing with a screen flow is you should always, always, always be thinking of your user experience. Does what you're asking the user to do on the flow, the way they interact with the screen, does it make sense from an end user perspective? Could a fifth grader do it? Those are your key guiding principles there. Okay, now that I'll climb off my soapbox. These are more in detail for kind of each of the things I've talked about. So Autolaunch flows, I like to use these a lot if I'm doing like the same 4 things over and over again. I'm not going to put the same 4 things in my flow. I'm just going to make an Autolaunch flow that I can keep calling as needed. I already mentioned keeping pink to the beginning and the end whenever you can. And then just being mindful of DML operations. This one honestly applies to every single flow you ever build in your life. My biggest example of this is filtering. Filtering was a huge game changer when Salesforce rolled that out, because we used to have to keep doing different get records, and that makes your flow slow because it has to keep querying your database. But with this method, if you just use a filter, you already have the records. All you're asking Salesforce to do is do what's in memory and not go actually touch the database.
So, Clarissa, can I ask a question?
Yes, please. I know I'm talking fast too. Sorry.
I want to on bullet point 2.
Mm-hmm.
Keep pink at the beginning and the end whenever possible. There's a reason for that. Why can you expand on that?
So my reason for that is usually just keeping things like being kind to your limits and doing things like you would ask me this question, Terry, and I don't have a nice articulate.
Okay, that's all right. I can answer it for you.
You answer your own question then.
I was trying to set you up to where you could do it. So and Boone, the pink is any of the DML. So that's the updates, the gets, all of those types of create and delete. I think those are the 4. The reason for pink at the beginning and the end it has to do with the way Salesforce actually processes your flows. They will, if let's say it's the way it bulkifies. And so you might think a flow generally it's just processing a single record at a time, but it's technically behind the scenes bulkifying that transaction. And so whenever it hits a pink element, it has to stop at that point and go and bring in all of the other flows to grab. So they're doing a single query or a single whatever the pink element is. And so if you throw those things into the middle of your flows, you're actually stopping that progress until all of the records kind of catch up and it's able to process that transaction as a single transaction instead of multiple ones. So by grouping them at the beginning or grouping them at the end, you're just making your flow more effective or from a bulkification standpoint.
Thank you,
there you go.
Much more articulate than I would have given. I mean, that being said, I will even show you some flows today where there's pink in the middle because that's when it makes sense to throw it there. Like, especially record create. Sometimes you have to create a record before you can do something else. So you got to throw the record create in the middle, and that's okay. This is one of those things where you have to know the rules to break the rules. But again, these are Carissa's rules. They may not be Terry's rules. So you got to define your own rules and then know them so that you can break them. And the last one that I want to talk about, that this was a huge game changer for me as I have been developing flows. It was a huge day when Salesforce said, hey, if you make an input variable and you call it record ID, we'll just automatically pass the record in. But what no one told you was that if you made that variable type a record variable type, you don't have to do a get records for the opportunity that matches record ID. You can just say, I want an opportunity and I want this variable to be called record ID. And now you have all your opportunity fields without having to have a get. So we're right back to what Terry was just saying about, optimizing things, bulkifying. We're just doing that automatically because now we're saving ourselves one step in touching the saved data in Salesforce because we're just automatically passing that in right at the very beginning. Okay, so those are my Autolaunch flows and my feelings on them. Okay, Record triggered flows. Here are my feelings on record triggered flows. It's really important to be mindful of execution order. Are your flows firing in the appropriate order? Does the flow that fires third actually rely on a field that is being set in the flow that fires fourth? Maybe you need to rethink about that. That's why I like to have, as Terry calls it, a master flow that kind of functions as your traffic cop. That's going to say, this is what's happening when, and really be mindful of how things are going through. So that's why for me, it's one flow to rule them all, but not always. Again, this is my rule. I know when it's okay for me to break it. But for the most part, I try to have one flow where I can have decision elements inside of it that are going to power what needs to happen when. And just here's your fun fact in case you didn't know, if you're doing a before save record flow, you don't have to put an update because it's before it saves. So Salesforce will automatically update that record. Now you know. But after saves, you do have to put one in there because it's already saved. So don't forget. All right, that was your 5-second spiel on record triggered flows. Screen flows, always think about user experience. Again, we want to keep pink kind of before most of our screens and after all of our screens if we can. And you'll really notice this if you build a screen flow where you put those DML touches between screens, you'll notice a slower time as a user is going through the screens because Salesforce is doing all that stuff on the back end. Again, sometimes we have to, and that's perfectly acceptable. But just in the interest of having a good user experience, I try to put whatever I can at the beginning and whatever I can at the end. Something that I've started doing within the last few years is using a confirmation screen, a success screen, an error screen, or a toast message that provides that same information. I just find that helps users really be more aware of what they're doing. Plus, if you give them an error screen, they don't get the your flow failed, here's gobbledygook that means nothing to an end user. I mean, they still send me screenshots of my error screen that I built, and I'm like, yeah, I know I got an email, but at least they're not like, what does this mean? So those are my thoughts there. Meaningful buttons. The default is pause, previous, and save. Fun fact, it doesn't have to be. You can change those to whatever you want them to be. You can use custom buttons. There's an unofficial SF component that will let you include icons in your buttons. You can put buttons in the middle of your screen that don't even navigate. They can just be like cool little selecty buttons. There's a really awesome package called Avani that does cost money, but we just bought it. It's amazing. This is my spiel for it because you can do even more fun things with buttons in that thing. So make your buttons impactful, meaningful, all that good stuff. Use Salesforce icons. They're fun. They're exciting. And you can't use them in the default buttons. Okay. So now we're going to go look at some actual flows that I've been building. All right. It's going to be exciting. I know you're all on the edge of your seats. Okay. So I'm just going to keep this in the same order that I just kind of talked about them. This is an Autolaunch flow. I actually pulled up several Autolaunch flows so we could talk about maybe the different reasons why they're built the way they are. And I actually I don't remember if I built this one, but this is one that we have specifically that is going to work with an object we have called time tracking that's looking at essentially how long a record sits in a certain status or stage. So we use this on some of our custom objects that have stages or statuses. And it relies on like multiple records. There's a parent record that I think is the time tracking record, that it's a one-to-one with a record, and then each time tracking has a time entry that is, this is how long, like this is when it came in the stage, this is when it left the stage. So in this one in particular, we have some decision elements that we're going through. Again, use decisions, embrace them. This one, we don't have pink in here until we need pink. We have pink down here because that's when we actually need it based on what we're doing in this particular flow. So I told you to keep pink at the beginning and in the end, and here's a prime example of there's just pink everywhere in this guy. Okay, because it makes sense with what we need to do. We don't need to do something until a particular moment in time, so that's when we're going to do it. Like, for example, we don't have a time tracking record, so we need to create one. Okay, well, we don't know that until we know that. So then we're going to create it. And yes, you can be entertained by the stuff that I and my other developer friends do in our org, where we use fun things like Tharshibi and Nabro as our decision names, because it's okay to have fun in Salesforce. It really is. I promise. Your end users don't see it. It's okay. So those are some of the things that we do here, where we do those little, I don't know, fun bits in our decisions. And in this one also, I think a good thing to call out is this level of looping through the same decision. Sometimes, especially when we're newer to Flow, we have a tendency to have a decision that decides one thing. And then after that, we have another decision that decides another thing. That's something I used to do. And then one day I had a brain child and was like, what if I just have it go right back to the same decision element? And what this one does is it looks for a particular flag, or you can also use an is visited if you have an assignment or something in there. You can just use is visited. So in this one, it has match reason to record. So I could say match. I don't know which one it is, but I could pick one of these and say was visited equals false. And so that would ensure I'm only visiting that one time as I'm going through. So you can either use a Boolean variable that you set in your assignment, or you can use a was visited as well. And then you can really use just one decision if you want. Again, you don't have to do that. It's an option. It depends on how comfortable everyone in your org is with flows, and if they're going to be able to look at that and understand that that's what it's doing. I can look at this and know that that's what it's doing because I'm looking here to see the connection to fields change. So I know, okay, my decision is doing something to only let me visit this first one time. And then once I visit it, I'll proceed down the list of outcomes. Okay, let's see if there's anything else fun and exciting in this flow. Okay, here's a good example of how I kept my pink to the end. The only time I updated the time tracking record is at the very end. I'm not updating it any other time. So while I have pink sprinkled throughout, I'm trying to be very strategic on when I'm touching each type of record or each specific record. I have seen times where people will be like, I need to update it at this time, and then I need to update it at this time. Try not to do that. You're just putting more strain on your flow. You're putting more strain on Salesforce. It's going to make things run slower. It's going to cause some problems, especially if you have a bunch of other things that happen. If you have a lot of, for example, if you're doing a flow with an opportunity and you're having it update the opportunity multiple times, but you also have like 17 record triggered flows in opportunity, you're just asking for problems because now it's going to keep firing each of those every single time you commit an update. So try to keep your single updates to the end. That's why you'll see that my flows tend to have a ton of assignments. So I do all my manipulation with the data in an assignment, and then I wait till the last possible moment I can to actually commit the update. Okay, so that's one of these. Let's see if there's another fun one. Ooh, we got some assignments and decisions, an invocable method in this one, some deduping. So this one is sending an email notification. And I don't think it actually is doing anything. So most of these that you'll see in my org that have been built, they don't have any ping at the beginning because we're just putting that as an input variable and we're passing it in from whatever flow or process is triggering this. And most of the time in our org, it's another flow that's kicking this off. So we'll just pass in the information we need. And now we've completely bypassed having to do any sort of DML operation at the beginning of the flow because we've already done that in another flow. And it would be silly to do it in one flow and then do it again in another flow. So we just pass it in and then loop through all of that information as needed, or use it however we need to in each flow. Pause and take a drink because I'm talking fast. Okay, see if there's anything else that I want to talk about in here. So in this one, we don't do any pink, we don't do any gets until kind of in the middle, but that's because that's when we need it. And then this one is using several invocable methods. One to convert a collection of records into a string. This is probably one if you're not doing complex things with flows necessarily. This is a package you can get from Unofficial SF that can be really helpful if you get a collection of strings from Salesforce, but you need to turn it into a string to pass into something else, or maybe vice versa. You can get a string out of Salesforce, but you need it to be a collection instead. That's a super powerful Unofficial SF component to use. And then we're deduping, because this is getting like who needs the notification, and we're also making sure they're not also in the queues that we need to notify, so that someone only gets one email notification. So that's kind of the purpose of this particular flow. So then it's going to make sure that they're added if they're needed to, or not if they're not. And then at the very end, it's actually going to do the things where it finds the users, finds their emails, and then sends. So that's what this one in particular does. Are we feeling good with Autolaunch? Are you like, Carissa, please stop talking about Autolaunch. I don't care anymore. Talk about something else. How are you feeling? I've also not checked the chat at all. So I'm going to do that now.
Clarissa mentioned the idea of being able to pass data between flows. That's a really key piece to understand as you're looking at structuring your flows. Speak out if you're not familiar with what that looks like, because that's an important concept of how that works. Because you don't want to repeat any of those pink elements or repeat any of what you've already done in a prior flow when you're moving data between them.
So that actually is a great segue to one of the screen flows I have. This is one of my favorite methods to do that, where I will have a decision where I look at, did I pass that in from my parent flow or did I not? And if I did, great, don't do anything. But if I didn't, let's go get that data now. And I'm going to assign it. So I'm always assigning it to the same variable so that I can use it in the same places later in the flow without confusion. But that's one of the ways that I do it to help myself, especially as you're iterating through different flow versions. Like you may start with it in what becomes a subflow, and then later you're going to launch it from a parent flow. So that way it's there if you need it, or it also lets you use the same flow in multiple places where maybe you're just not going to get that information right off the bat.
So Kristen has a question for you, Clarissa, in the chat. When using a before save, you're looking at who the user is? Are you using last modified by or $user?
When I do anything in Flow, I by default use $user. I just find that to be the most beneficial. So $user is always going to be your running user.
Yep.
And that way it's consistent across all your flows if you use $user. I don't think that last modified would function the same way $user would either. It might. But if you were using last modified, you'd have to go through more clicks, honestly, because you'd have to click record, last modified, whatever you need on the user field, versus $user you can get to right off the bat without going into record. So save yourself clicks, not just your users. Okay, cool. Validation rules, my man. I hit validation rules all the time in my flows. It is a real pain in the patootie. There is, however, an unofficial SF component. By the way, I get nothing from unofficial SF. I just plug them all the time because I use them all the time. But they have a component called check validations that you can use. We're actually in the process of, at some point when I have time, what a joke, I will add it to our update stage flow, because it fails a lot because the validation rule blocks the update. But the check validations basically simulates saving the record without actually saving the record. So you can then return to your user in a screen, like here's all the errors. I mean, it doesn't have to be in a screen flow. You can use it in Autolaunch or any other kind of flow. So validation rules can for sure be a problem. Depending on what kind of flow I'm building, I will sometimes try to build the validation rule into the flow in some capacity. Like if it's this field has to be populated, well, I'm just going to require it in my screen flow then. It totally depends on the validation rule though. So my default is to, if you can't just build it in or you have a ton of validation rules, then I would use check validation. That's going to kind of simulate that, and then you can let your user know they're going to have a problem. Clear as mud, hopefully. Sweet. I saw the
Yeah,
thumbs up.
no, I appreciate that. We try not to bring too many packages in from App Exchange. And so, we're just trying to basically keep it out of the box as much as possible. And we don't even use a whole lot of Apex code. Most of it is clicks. So we've run into that quite a bit. And so we've started to move those things into our flows and do our validations through the flow so we can present the error in a better way to the user. This is what's going on. Go fix it.
That's totally fair. I've done that a lot. And I think we have a lunch and learn maybe in November on flow error handling, where I can talk even more about how I handle that kind of thing. But a lot of my flows, I will incorporate at least some of the validations I know are going to be an immediate issue. I will put those into the flow so that it negates the user ever having that issue upon sake.
Yeah. Thanks.
You can leverage your fault path there, I would hope as well. And maybe you already mentioned that, and evaluate what the actual error is, that you should be able to make that if it's a common validation role, you could address that probably pretty specifically.
It totally depends on how you want to handle it, for sure. Okay, we'll talk about record saves now. So this is the master flow for an after save on an opportunity. This guy has been updated so many times in like the last month. And it has, I don't think it has any start conditions because we're using it as a master save. And also because of this first decision right here, this is something we need to have happen on. This needs to be evaluated on basically every single opportunity that we have. So that's why this one has no record criteria. Now, it may make sense if within this flow, I only have like 5 things I was evaluating and they only happened when XYZ is true, then I would for sure put record criteria on here. So it's not firing every single time. But that just doesn't make sense for this particular flow. So that's why it's not happening. And then if we go down, so this is actually a classic, 2 different developers worked on this flow. This part was not me. I didn't do this. This was someone else. So it's formatted a little differently and maybe not how I would have done it. And it is updating the opportunity right off the bat. But it is what it is. And I'll probably change it at some point when I have to update this flow the next time. And then there's the Carissa built it part, which is looking at what specifically changed. So this is another big reason why this one doesn't have any entry criteria, because it's looking at so many different pieces of what is specific to this opportunity, which I could have done as many different flows. But in this case, I found it easier to manage as just one because they are such small pieces. It felt a little excessive to put those in separate flows. Now, if I were doing like 17 things in each of these decisions, they would be subflows. But as you can see in a lot of them, it's just one thing where it is a subflow that it's doing. So this is what made sense at the time. And lots of times you'll see my decisions that I build that I didn't actually need to build because something happened during my iterative development process where it's like, oh, I didn't actually need a specific decision for submitted as the stage value. But I'm just going to leave it there because I have a sneaking suspicion that at some point I'm going to need it in the future in a different version of this. So I'll just go ahead and leave it. It doesn't hurt anything for me to have it. I'll just reroute where things need to go. So that's why you'll see sometimes I have these decision elements that don't seem to do anything. And in this one, there's a whole lot going on here from different processes. The first time we built this flow, I think I had maybe stage and this one. Like I can tell you what projects each of these branches are from, which is the wild part of being one person who mostly works on sales stuff. And you'll see we have a lot of subflows. We have a lot of assignments. I have a sneaking suspicion that this, okay. So in this one, it actually will not update opportunities, but will pass out opportunities that need to update. So this is another case of, because I was the one building all of this, I was very intimately familiar with how, don't mind me just throwing my water bottle, how each of these pieces worked together. So I have a subflow that's going to manipulate opportunity values, but I'm not going to actually do anything until I get down here where I decide, was there anything in that needed to update? And I'm going to update it here in this flow instead of in that subflow. That's, again, a personal preference. I try to keep my DML operations in the parent flow and not necessarily the subflow unless it just makes more sense for them to be in the subflow. But especially updates, I try to keep those up and not down. Let's see, what other fun and exciting things can we talk about? Got a record creating here. That's dope. So a lot of this.
Did you just say that's dope? Is that what you just said?
I did. I
did say that's dope. All right.
Dope.
Okay.
I could say it's groovy if that would make you feel better.
That's gnarly. Awesome.
Yeah, totally tubular. Trying to think if there was anything else that was super important to talk about. But since this is an after save, I don't think I'm actually doing anything directly on the opportunity. Except this bit up here where it's creating a separate record and then needs to update a value on the opportunity. So that would be why the update opportunity happens here, because we're not touching the opportunity anywhere else. The rest of this is all for related record information. So that's why it's all down here hanging out doing other stuff, except for syncing values across multiple opportunities. Okay, so that's my one example of a record flow. I have many others. Any other questions around record flows? I realize I'm kind of powering through this, but it's fine. Stop and interrupt me if you feel like you need to. Any other questions? I'm going to slide into my favorite screen flow. This is the screen flow I've straight up been building for probably the last month. So it's pretty gnarly. If you want to know what it actually looks like, this is how it appears on the page. And this does use those Avani buttons I was talking about earlier. I know someone else said they had a sweet session in Dreamforce. So yeah, we just bought Avani components. I am obsessed with them. They're amazing. So this is my personal development org that we're in right now. So this is a project I'm actively working on right now. My boss is actually reviewing it today. So it lets you do view and create as needed of things. So uses all sorts of fun stuff. So what that actually looks like on the back end is this monster, for lack of a better phrase. And you'll see a lot of Carissa's favorite things. We have pink at the beginning, pink at the end. We got a lot of assignments. We got a lot of subflows. Screens sprinkled throughout. I'm using some filters because I love me some filters. And we have fault paths because you got to have a fault path. You'll notice all of mine, I tend to use a fault path, and then I always just go to the same error screen. This is what we tend to display unless we can give them a more specific error, but usually for like a get records, it's because they don't have permissions or something like that. So that's our error screen that we use pretty much everywhere. Let's see if there's anything specific I want to talk about on this one. So you all kind of saw that first screen that has a create or a view button for like 4 different categories. So what that actually looks like is this on the build screen. It's very squished. And one of the things I personally don't like about Flow Builder is that your Lightning components and Lightning Web components often render as a header. And you're like, cool, what does that look like? So that part is rather lame unless it's one of your Salesforce default ones, but I tend to honestly not use those because I can do more with other things. So all my button groups are pretty much the same. They're formatted the same with the view or the create. And then each of those, depending on what you do, is going to follow a similar but different path. And just one thing that I wanted to point out, because sometimes when we're doing flows, we're doing repetitive work. Like a lot of these, you'll see they all have a prior screen flag. Oh, Carissa, why did you name those the same thing? You can't name things the same. Because my friend, if I click on this. Oh, not that one, because that's the first one. We'll do the second one. Underscore abbreviation, and that way it has a different API name. But to me, when I'm looking at this and reading what all these things are, I can also just tell because it has the same name. Oh, it's doing the same thing, but in a slightly different context for this specific path. So that's one thing I like to do. I also have firmly embraced the ability to connect one thing to multiple things. So you'll see that there's like, are there 3 different? It looks like we just have these 2 different pieces connect to the same place, which is this one right here. That's going to make a couple of different Boolean values checked to then pass into our subflow. So embrace the ability to pass variables between flows, especially if you're doing something like this where it's screen flows. You'll notice I firmly embrace the Boolean variable. It's my best friend. And I also, because this is one big process that I did break into separate subflows, I tried to format them somewhat similarly. So all of these have a bEdit Boolean variable and a bNoRecordsExist variable, because I want to force between an edit and create path. Well, if you're editing, I want you to edit, and if you're creating, I want you to create. But I also want to show you something specific in this subflow if no records exist, because I need to force you to create one. So that's kind of like, I guess, a gnarly screen flow, and a lot of this is very similar. I copied and pasted a lot of this and then just kind of renamed it as needed. I had a lot of fun with this one, as I'm sure you can tell from my sheer excitement in sharing it with you. Trying to think if there's anything else fun and exciting. We go to one of these. So for each of these, like we did a home button. So this is essentially like a finish flow button, but I just called it home because what I want to have happen is I want it to go back to that first screen, which it will do because it's on a Lightning page. So if I were launching this as a button, it would actually close out the modal, but because it sits on the Lightning page, it will basically just continuously run the flow. And you'll see a lot of these. There's also a looking at like what action did you take in the subflow to then determine where am I taking you next? Did you cancel out of whatever you're doing in the subflow? Based on that, what page do I need to take you back to? Were you on the view screen? Were you on the home screen? Did you actually create a new record? If you did, let's actually go get those records again so that we can show them on the main screen. And while it crushed my soul to have to do a git of the same thing twice, I had to in this instance because it was the only way I could get the numbers to show up on these buttons. Fun fact. Tried it without, didn't work. So I had to do a re-git to basically force a refresh of all the information to get the numbers to work, as well as if you made any updates, I then wanted to show you those updates if you went back to the view screen. So sometimes there's just stuff like that where we know we don't want to have to do it, but especially with screen flows, user experience is king. Like, I don't want you to update a record and then not see that reflected when you go back to the view screen. So in that case, I had to get the records again, which I hated doing, but in this case, it was necessary to make Salesforce do what I needed it to. So, okay, I've talked for a long time. Please converse with me, ask me questions, tell me that you hate all of my flow design, something.
We evidently have a shy group of people.
Apparently.
I'm curious on this screen flow that you've got here, that your favorite. Mm-hmm. The graphics that you've got there, is that a component? I forget the name of the tool that you're referencing.
Oh yeah, so this is just straight up a display image.
Display image.
And so
okay.
These are just images that we created to drop in there. And we changed this from a vertical layout to a horizontal layout and we have not updated the images to reflect that. So right now they're a little stretched and wonky.
Okay.
But yeah, the only piece on here that is from Avani are these buttons.
The buttons. And the
Which
advantage
I could have
of
done with unofficial SF. I was just trying to go for consistency. And unofficial SF, you cannot do variables in the name of the button, but I can in Avani, which is how I was able to plug in the number of the records.
It's very sharp.
Chris, I have a question.
Yeah.
Could you go back into the whole decision element? I'm intrigued by the looping through the decision on multiple things that have changed, because we have scenarios where we wanted to do the same thing, but ultimately ended up creating multiple decisions, stacked. But I'm intrigued by this, and I'm curious, can you show in the decision, the what changed decision? Are you putting so that was visited thing, you've got to have that on every single path?
Yes. On every single one, I have a was visited for like the following decision element.
Got it. That's how the second time through and the third time through, it doesn't hit those again?
Exactly. Yeah, because you have visited it, so you're not going to visit it again. That's one that I for sure encourage using, but also test it to be sure that you're using it the right way. Like if I had done this with the assignments that sit below the decision, it would fail because it may not have visited those specific assignments. So that's why I kept it in this particular use case at the sub decision level instead. Like, does it work the same if I broke apart each of these? It totally does. But I partially find this easier to navigate around just as someone looking at it instead of having this very long thing that I have to scroll through.
Right.
So that's, I think, honestly, part of why I tend to do it that way. It just makes sense to my brain. So that's why I do it that way.
Yeah, no, thanks. I appreciate that. Is something that I think we're going to want to try to shorten up especially on opportunities, because we're looking for a lot of things that change, and then we process differently based on what changed.
For sure. Obviously, same. Okay. I see a question in the chat about giving users toast messages. So glad you asked. Let me show you how I do that. It's the very last thing I do in all of these subflows in my value selling flow. This is just an out-of-the-box Salesforce action called show toast. And you set your variables for how long you want it to be. Do you want it to be dismissible, pest, or sticky? And it will tell you, well, I guess it doesn't actually tell you what each of those do, but you can look up what each of those do. And then you give it a message that you want it to do and your type. So I pretty much across the board in this particular flow went for an error screen and a success toast. So everything, if something fails, they'll get a screen message that says, hey, this failed. If it was successful, they just get a little toast that pops up that says, hey, you've updated XYZ record, or your record created successfully, or whatever. And if you wanted to see how to put this in, you just click this little plus, you click on action, you wait for your bazillion D actions to load. And once they do, you can just type toast. And that's how you add it in. Ooh, long text areas. I have a love-hate relationship with long text areas. I have some users who are like, I need long text areas. I'm like, do you really need a long text area? Yeah, long text areas are kind of rough. So are you using that as a trigger for your flow to run? Or just in general wanting to see if it's changed? Like, is it a decision for the flow to run? Is it a decision somewhere else in the flow in the decision? Okay. That's.
Are you looking for something specifically in there that has changed? Is it contextual, or is it just that it's different?
Just is changed.
It's just changed.
And it fires when it's not changed.
Could you do a formula field that compares before and like if it's in a record trigger flow, like a dollar record, before.
Well, and that's what I just changed it to, the before, and then does not equal the before does not equal the record. And it's not running as often, but I was just curious of what other people have done or may have.
Yeah, long text areas are honestly a pain in the ass to try to use in a flow, especially in a decision like that. Yeah, I think your record and record prior is probably the right way to go with that. Long term, I would try to steer users away from long text area fields. Fire automation. I know it's a lot easier said than done.
Okay, thanks.
That's my advice. Any other questions, comments, concerns?
I like how you did up at the top of this thing on your decisions, where even if you didn't do something, you still plugged in a decision point for it or decision path for it. I think it was in this flow of the.
Maybe this one, or it might have been
that one. Yeah. I like that concept just because it shows whoever is following you that you did it intentional.
Right.
That you had thought through that, and it is a valid option, and we choose not to do something with it. It's kind of a clever design model I hadn't thought of before, but I like that.
And I also have a tendency to always rename default outcome because that's like the most important.
I always do too. Yes.
The flow is default outcome. So yeah, I didn't do that here. And I thought about it. I actually have made several revisions to this, and I thought like, oh, do I reuse default outcome? And then I decided no, and then ended up on one of these screens. I actually ended up with a button, and I started to put in a decision for it, and I went, no, it'll just follow the default path, and that's what I wanted to do anyway. So like, why on earth would I build a separate path for it to just go back to the beginning of the flow when that's already accounted for with it didn't meet the other criteria, go back to the beginning. So it was fun. Plus, there's some definite power in just putting an end in a decision where you can just be like, boom, end flow. I don't often get to do that, so that was really fun to be able to do in this one in particular.
Very nice. Any other questions? Anybody have a flow problem that you'd like Carissa to answer for you? How to solve?
So can I quickly? Can you explain a little bit more on? I always put the end on if I'm not doing anything. So what does that? Where you leave it open ended, where it just says view value maps? What is that really doing then?
This
down, like where it says show error, or just on your ones that don't have an end button. They just are hanging out there.
So all of them are always connected to something else. So like in this particular flow, the end goal from this screen is that you're either going to end up going into the subflow or you're going to go back to the beginning of the flow, with the exception of this one path where you clicked on edit selected, but you didn't actually select anything. So at that point, I need you to go back to the view screen and select something. So most of these are following that path, which is the beautiful thing of auto layout in Flow. When you connect something to another thing, you can click on it, and then it will highlight the piece that you have connected it to.
Okay, thanks. I haven't used that functionality.
Oh, I didn't used to use it, and now I use it all the time. Obviously, I have it all over this flow.
So click on the little circle thing to where show her how you did that.
Oh, yeah.
So
you can just click on here, and maybe it won't let me do it there.
Yeah, do it. Yeah. Yeah, there you go.
Reroute connector. And so you just click this guy, and then it will give you a plus icon on pretty much every single thing in your flow, and then you can reroute it to a particular spot. We want to see the spaghetti version?
Brian, come on, man. Hey, and speaking of you, Brian, I do still have your cup that I owe you.
We forgot all about it.
I haven't. It's sitting here with your name on it. We just have to figure out how to connect.
There's the spaghetti version. It's not even that bad because I built it not. I know it's a little disappointing that it's not gross.
I thought with all those point to other things that when you switched it would just, there you zoom in and you can see it a little bit better. Not as bad.
Yeah, they're just really tiny and like back behind the labels for things.
So Brian, are you saying you're a spaghetti version?
No.
Oh, thank you.
I just know when you're routing, when you do those reroute connectors, if you look at the spaghetti version, it just hurts your brain.
That does.
It sure can. It's kind of like looking at when you get a process builder error and it gives you the link to like view it and you click on the link to view it and it gives you it in flow and everything's just stacked on top of each other. You're like, I can't.
Yeah.
What does this mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it will. Christopher, spot on with that tip. If you build in, if you can flip back and forth between them and it will basically restructure your flow into like the ideal view on how it should look.
The ideal spaghetti view?
Auto layout and freeform.
Oh, for both.
So if you built it one way in auto layout and then you switch it to freeform and then back to auto layout, it will restructure it into this is how we think it should look.
Very cool.
I don't know if it moved anything in this one. It may not have. But it can sometimes. Although I will admit that in auto layout, I do hate the way it stretches the decision sometimes. But I'm willing to deal with that for the ease of use that I find auto layout to be.
That's a good call out on the outcome names. Always be conscious of some folks may have bigger monitors. So sometimes your outcomes are only 2 words long. Sometimes they're 5. So make sure you name them descriptive early or people will be like, what are these? I can only see the first 2 words and they're all the same.
Good point. It's easy to forget people have little monitors. So
I do that. And also on all of these, since I name them the same, the API name always has a different note. So when you're looking at it, if there is an error, you can tell which one it was for. And then the other thing I do too is always trying to add, and I'm so glad that they updated this so you can actually see the description that you add on a flow element. You can always hover over this, and that it doesn't matter how big their screen is, they'll be able to see that. So that's always helpful too.
The one other gotcha that I'll point out to the group is be very careful you copy an element when you need to copy it and cut it when you want to move it, because Salesforce will just add like a 1 or a 2 to the API name if you copy it, and it'll make it really hard to use. Sometimes because you're not thinking, I need to look to see what numbers on the end of my API name.
I feel like they have improved that because they used to just always append like _0 after everything. They used to do that. And now it'll be like copy 1 of blah, 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 copy 2 of blah, blah, blah. So cool. They did improve that, but you still have to go change all the names because they're obnoxious. And
yeah,
if I open a flow where I see copy of, I just kind of want to cry a little bit. So.
Well, we are at the bottom of the hour, and Carissa, great job. Appreciate it. If you guys have questions, feel free to reach out to us via our Slack channel or via the community. We're happy to provide flow assistance as you have questions related to it. With that, we'll close out. Thanks for coming, and we'll see you next month.